columnist, also author of A Darker Shade of Crimson, Odyssey of a Harvard Chicano. Ruben Navarrette Jr. joins us today. Ruben, thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you, Ed.
I think it is the one question that people still want asked. It seemed as if all of a sudden this happened. Bang! And we were awash in immigration, so many problems. Ruben, come on, let's get to this realistically here. There had to be a plan. This had to be something that had been looked at for a long period of time, and there had to be a door open for someone to start this flow of all these children coming into America, correct?
Right, exactly. This was not an overnight phenomenon. Let's take the long view. It says that years ago we started deporting gang members from Los Angeles back to countries like El Salvador, where they created gangs like MS-13 and began to run that country. And countries like Honduras and Guatemala created a lot of turmoil, as you heard in the earlier segment, began to enlist people, threaten people's lives. So it was already sort of in the mix. 3 years ago, he alerted the Obama administration that there was coming across the the Texas-Mexico border, some numbers of Central Americans in 2011, and that Obama did nothing about it. So the administration had some warning. They didn't prepare, but they had to have known this was coming. The spark really is the issue. What brought about this current exodus in the last few months or so? 47,000 young people in the last 8 months, more tens of thousands on their way. The best estimate we have, the best intelligence we have, says that this started because drug cartels spread a rumor through a misinformation campaign in the media in those three countries that said if you get to the United States, Congress has passed an amnesty and you can stay. Off they went.
So if the drug cartels, let's just follow that line of thinking, if they're the ones that started this, does it not point logically to the drug cartels benefiting from this, to the drug cartels taking advantage of this, and for the overflooding or the overrunning of the border, making it easier for the cartels themselves to do more illegalities between the border, to do more smuggling?
Right, that's the twofer. The benefit, this is a brilliant plan, brilliant, cynical, and evil, this plan, because they're able to charge, and they were able to charge $8,000 per kid. Family members were selling things to be able to front the bill to take these kids. $8,000 per kid, 47,000 kids. It's over $300 million. As a bonus, now we are told by the Border Patrol that 1 out of every 3 of their agents on the southern border is tied up babysitting this group of young people. So whole pieces of the border are not being protected. So the cartels are able to move drugs and whatever else through those blind spots. So it was a brilliant plan, and it worked pretty well.
Ruben, is it not fair to say that looking at what has happened here, that if we were to be in the room, I guess, with any of the members of the people who started this, that quite frankly they have been laughing at Border Patrol? Now, not at individuals. We're not trying to cast aspersions on the men and women who work for the Border Patrol, but could we not say that they are simply laughing and having a grand old time because they knew this would happen, they knew they would be overrun, and they just knew that they could take advantage of the situation and not have to worry one bit about any repercussions?
Oh, absolutely. They knew it would work. I think it worked out perfectly, even better than they may have hoped. But the big misconception, and I got to say, the U.S. media has done a horrible job of understanding this story. I listen to a lot of conservative talk radio all day long. They don't understand this story. I always am fascinated by the tendency of very smart people to talk about immigration in the way it's dumb. And I find that in this case as well. This is not a case of the cartels figuring out that President Obama had approved DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, years ago. No, this wasn't the case. There's always been, no matter what administration we're talking about, Republican or Democrat alike, going back to Ronald Reagan, there's not deport unaccompanied minors and send them back across the border. And that's always been the case. The cartels finally figured that out. So we can't pin this on Obama or any particular president. It's always been the common sense gesture by the Border Patrol to not take an 8-year-old that you found unaccompanied by the border and send him across the border at midnight. That would be dumb and dangerous. So that's what they found out, and now it's out and the whole world's coming.
But if we can't pin this, and this is what the American people will ask, if we can't pin this on President Obama, President Bush, President Reagan, whom do we pin it on then? Where did this start? Who gets the blame right from square one?
Yeah, the cartels. The people who get the profit should get the blame. But in fact, with regard to Obama, there are 3 things this administration did wrong. I said one already. They didn't pay attention to the warning. They didn't heed the warning that Governor Rick Perry gave them and others gave them that this was happening 3 years ago. That's one. 2, when they got here and the children began to arrive, They housed them in very inhumane, unsanitary conditions. 40 kids to a room with one toilet that didn't work. They wouldn't give the kids medicine if they had been prescribed medicine. They gave them a ham sandwich and an apple per day. That was their meal. So they really bungled the care and feeding of these children. But the third thing they did wrong, and you and I may be in agreement here, the Obama administration has a great tendency to cover its ass. It knows how to do that. Whether you're talking about Benghazi or Obamacare or the IRS scandals or the prisoner swap, it is just masterful at covering its own ass. And that's what it's trying to do now. It's trying to spin this in such a way that they did nothing wrong. And, well, what did you expect? We've done the best we can. So those are the three things they've done wrong. They didn't cause it, but, man, they did not do a good job of handling it once it arrives.
Okay, then. Others will ask then, what is the end game here? You have people saying that, and again, this is all the opinions of those who are critics of the Obama administration. Some would say that this is to curry favor with Hispanic voters. This is also to create a new era, a new generation of voters for the Democratic Party. Ruben, I got to believe, listening to you right now, nothing is that simple.
Nothing's that simple because Democrats have a tendency to shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, if it was really that simple that Republicans were always evil on immigration and Democrats were always the angels on immigration, I guess the analogy would hold. But I hear all the time from conservative talk radio that somehow every single undocumented immigrant who might get legalized is an automatic Democratic voter. And that flies in the face of the fact that just a couple of days ago, Hillary Clinton, the presumptive 2016 Democratic nominee, said we should send them all back. And immediately she was hit with a barrage of criticism from Latino supporters. So this issue does not just bedevil Republicans, it also bedevils Democrats. And it's not a foregone conclusion. Ronald Reagan was very popular in the Hispanic community and the immigrant community, and he signed a bill in 1986 legalizing 3 million people. So I think that we need to think much more deeply and treat these issues much more fairly. We don't have a clear view of the politics of these kinds of things. And it's not the case that President Obama, who's deported 2 million people in 5 years, is necessarily beloved in the immigrant community.
Let's clear this up another way, because you recently wrote an article where you talked about new wave of young border crossers defies stereotype. Now, few minutes we have. You said Americans might be able to better understand this story if not for 5 things that get in the way. I found them all fascinating here. First of all, even though these kids could be deserving of refugee status, we're projecting onto this story our feelings about immigrants as if they were coming here for jobs.
Yeah, we have this idea that the only Latin American refugees are little kids named Elian who float on boats from Cuba to Miami. In fact, if the definition of a refugee, someone who gets a hearing as to refugee status, is someone who's coming out of a war zone, if in fact that's happening in Central America, thanks to these gangs, these kids ought to get a hearing. I'm not saying they should stay. Some of them have to be deported and sent back home again. But you can't say wholesale that all 47,000 might not have a claim to refugee status. So that to that first point, we have taken everything we feel about the immigration debate and projected onto this group of refugees.
We're mixing terms and confusing amnesty with protective status. I found that one to be most interesting. Explain, please.
Yeah, so amnesties can only be granted by one party, and that's Congress, not even by the executive branch. Amnesty is a permanent legal status afforded to people like was done in 1986, where people can stay here legally. Protective status, temporary protective status, simply means you can't be deported once you're here. You're still undocumented. All those kids who came in through the border and then got shipped off to Chicago or Pennsylvania or New York to be with relatives, they all have a notice to appear, and when they fail to appear, they become undocumented, which means they can be picked up and deported anytime. So we do have those, we mix those apples and oranges. We basically think that if you get here and you're not deported, ergo you've been given an amnesty, and that's not true.
I think you talked about this earlier. We're susceptible to believing that the Obama administration is offering some kind of special accommodation in this case, which in your opinion is simply just not true.
It's not true. Nobody can accuse the Obama administration of being accommodating to immigrants. I mean, if anything, they seem to have really contempt for immigrants, and the way they treat them indicates that. And certainly they've done nothing bending over backwards to take care of these immigrants once they arrive. That's bothers me, because independent of what happens when they get here, once you take custody of them, you work for me, pal, Border Patrolman. You're on my dime. You represent me as a taxpayer and as an American. And I don't want to read stories later that you've been abusing these kids or neglecting them somehow.
I only have about 30 seconds left. You said we think this is happening because of either a push or a pull, when it's probably both, but please comment on this. Finally, we look for one-size-fits-all answers, and there just aren't any, correct?
Yeah, that's the way we prefer to deal with most public policy issues, Social Security reform, Iraq, or whatever. Let's make it easy. This is not an easy problem. It's not going to have an easy solution.
Would you say, about 15 seconds that we have here, that this is out of control to the point where some people say it might take 10 years to fix this? It might not even, that might be optimistic.
we don't have a fix yet in mind. And at some point, we're going to have to do the unthinkable. We're going to have to reverse this policy and say that people can simply not come here anymore as children and be allowed to stay. We're not sure we're ready to do that yet, but inevitably that's where we're headed.
Ruben Navarrette, I know we read a lot of your stuff. I certainly do at mercurynews.com. It is a pleasure to have you on. Please, let's do it again, and thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, Ruben Navarrette certainly has some interesting things that he has to add to this whole discussion here. But again, it comes down to, no matter how you put it, this is not going to be fixed overnight. Tell us what you think. Let us know on social media. We talk about it here. All the forms of social media, various programs here on Newsmax TV. And we'll talk more about it here on Midpoint, where every day we question everything. Where every day we question everything.
I was having trouble getting out of bed in